Welcome to another video concerning blockchain. What I'd like to talk about today is a couple concepts that are integral to the development process. So, the minimum viable product, the MVP, has entered our lexicon of late, and relates to the delivering of the amount of functionality necessary to meet the requirements, but no more. The idea of MVP is to deploy soon so that so that information can be gathered quickly to build the best product in the end. So the idea is build it quick, deploy small pieces, deploy to a limited number of users possibly, so that you can get information and feedback, roll that feedback in, redeploy the next version, on and on it goes until you get a great product. So somewhat similar to that concept is the idea of a minimum viable ecosystem, or MVE. Now, MVE is a concept in a blockchain network. It's equivalent to the development team that is needed to build the blockchain environment. Well, the ecosystem referred to is the developer group and the membership group together that will provide input into the features that need to be built. So when we look at the concept of TradeLens that we've been using as an example all this time, while I don't have firsthand knowledge of exactly what the development process was that went into TradeLens, it's apparent that Maersk owns a shipping company. They own regular trucking lines, making them an excellent SME, or an excellent partner with IBM to develop the blockchain, because IBM's pretty much considered the leader in blockchain development, and Maersk is the largest trucking line in the world, the largest shipping line in the world for that matter. So getting those two together to develop automation for the shipping industry, just makes sense. The minimum viable ecosystem that was developed were 92 companies that tested the beta release in August of 2018. The beta release then was perfected and worked on until December of that same year, only 3 months, maybe 4 months later. And 60 companies then at that time went live with that December release. So the minimum viable ecosystem that they believed were important at the time was 92 companies who were able to develop, and then those 60 companies that went forward have now grown to over 150. And this is all data that is publicly available on the TradeLens website that shares with you about how it came to be and how it is doing currently. So we could infer that the MVE was 92 differing businesses that would form the whole ecosystem, from shippers to government customs agencies and more. Using this example of the type of development was more of a centralized structure, with the ecosystem robust enough to do testing, and then 3 months later to deploy it to the ecosystem. Of three types of development ecosystems that there are centralized, decentralized, and of course a hybrid. Of those three types, the Maersk IBM model was much more centralized than the other development models. Decentralized would mean that you'd have multiple companies, multiple founders, and each of the founders would take a piece of the development pie. They'd develop their part, and then they'd all get together. It's like having several development teams, but the development teams would be spread among several of the founding companies. And the hybrid, might farm out a thing or two here and there, but part of it would be centralized, part of it would be decentralized, thus creating the hybrid sort of development process. The development team will generally consist of several different roles. There's the steering committee members, legal consultants, blockchain consultants, crypto developers, project managers, product owners, user researchers, user experience designers, blockchain architects, system architects, blockchain developers, quality or test engineers, network engineers, business development managers, and a marketing manager or leader. All of those individuals need to be comprised in some way within the development team in order for everything to be covered and for the development to be successful. There are 4 major roles that an enterprise can play in a blockchain network. There's the founder, and that in the TradeLens example would be Maersk and IBM. A member, which would be the initial 92 members that began using the system in August of 2018, and finally the 60 members that began it in 2018, and eventually the 150 plus members that TradeLens has today. Most importantly, the members operate nodes. That's what distinguishes a member versus another type of a corporation within the ecosystem. They run the consensus nodes and validate the ledgers in particular. Operators who may or may not be founders or members, but who take responsibility for the network operations and technology management. So in this case, with TradeLens, IBM is most likely the partner that takes on the technology burden there. And then finally, there are users that would either be members or founders, and who would use the network. The example of TradeLens might be the customs agencies who simply need the information. They're not going to run a node. They're not going to do validations. They're not going to be a full-fledged member. They're the beneficiary. Their benefit there is simply the fact that the customs agencies need the information or output from the system. And they would simply just interact with possibly the application layer to get the information necessary, and may not even do that much depending on how they've hooked up the network. So what we've reviewed here is simply the fact that you need to have a concerted effort in the development process. This development process needs to be well considered and needs to be either a centralized or decentralized type of system where the development is very confined to a few members. The minimum viable ecosystem, in order to test it, will involve many companies. And once you have that minimum viable ecosystem, you can test and deploy. A company doesn't just deploy a blockchain to itself. A company deploys a blockchain because they've got a supply chain they want to manage, and there would be multiple companies involved in that supply chain. A company would develop a blockchain simply because they want to save time and save money in the processing of a lot of documentation and interactions, communications between parties that do business together. So with that, if you have any questions, put them in the comments. I'll try to answer them in upcoming videos, and be sure to subscribe. Thank you.